The grand hall of the Washington, D.C. Veterans Gala shimmered with elegance. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling, casting a golden hue over the gathering of political figures, celebrities, and decorated veterans. It was an evening dedicated to honoring those who had served the nation with valor. Every detail was meticulously planned, from the music to the seating arrangements. The air buzzed with conversations, laughter, and the clinking of glasses as people celebrated the heroes among them. Karoline Leavitt, the White House press secretary serving under President Donald Trump, arrived with grace. Dressed in a deep navy evening gown, she wore her American flag pinned proudly on her lapel. It wasn't just an accessory. It was a symbol of everything she stood for, everything she represented in her role. Near her, country music icon Carrie Underwood mingled with guests, her golden locks flowing elegantly as she moved through the crowd, her own flag pin gleaming under the lights. But as the evening unfolded, an unexpected request broke the celebratory atmosphere. A stern-faced event organizer approached Karoline first. "Ms. Leavitt, may I have a word?" he asked, his voice a mix of authority and discomfort. She followed him to a quiet corner where another organizer waited, looking just as uneasy. "We've been informed that some guests might find the display of the American flag controversial," he began, hesitating before continuing. "We kindly ask if you could consider removing your pin for the evening. It's purely to maintain a neutral atmosphere." Karoline's eyes widened, her jaw tightening as she absorbed the request. "Controversial?" she repeated, her voice low but firm. "This is a Veterans Gala. We're here to honor those who served under this flag. How can it be controversial?" The organizers exchanged nervous glances before one muttered, "We don't want to make anyone uncomfortable." Without another word, Karoline turned away, her mind reeling from the absurdity of the request. But before she could gather her thoughts, she saw Carrie Underwood being pulled aside by another organizer, receiving the same request. Carrie's eyes narrowed, her lips pressing into a thin line. She shook her head slightly, disbelief evident on her face. Their eyes met across the room, a mutual understanding passing between them. They weren't just public figures, they were patriots. And to both, the flag meant more than politics or public opinion. It was about heritage, sacrifice, and respect. The choice was clear, and they were about to make it. Karoline approached Carrie with purposeful strides, her eyes blazing with determination. The soft hum of conversations around them faded as she whispered, "They asked you too?" Carrie nodded, her face etched with disbelief. "They said it was to avoid controversy. At a veterans event of all places. Can you believe that?" Karoline took a deep breath, her fingers instinctively touching the flag pin on her lapel. "This is more than just a symbol. It represents every soldier, every sacrifice, every family waiting for their loved one to come home. I won't take it off." Carrie's shoulders straightened, her resolve hardening. "Neither will I. This isn't about politics. It's about respect." They stood there for a moment, their shared conviction forming an unspoken alliance. Around them, the gala continued, oblivious to the quiet storm brewing in that corner. But not for long. The night's program commenced with a series of speeches, each paying tribute to the veterans present. But as Karoline and Carrie made their way to their seats, they noticed the curious stares. Guests whispered, pointing subtly at the flag pins on their chests. The tension in the room became palpable. Then came the moment that changed everything. During a tribute performance, the screen behind the stage displayed a montage of American landscapes, soldiers saluting, and the flag waving majestically. As the national anthem played, the crowd instinctively rose to their feet, hands on hearts. All except a few. Karoline noticed them, guests who remained seated, faces devoid of emotion. A cold chill ran through her as she realized the source of the controversy. It wasn't the flag. It was what it represented to those who chose to look at it through a different lens. After the anthem, the evening's host invited Carrie Underwood on stage. As she made her way up, applause echoed through the hall, her presence commanding attention. But just before she took the microphone, an organizer whispered to her once more, Last chance, Carrie. Please, for the sake of peace. Carrie's eyes flickered with anger, but she maintained her composure. She looked at the audience, then at the flag pin on her chest. With a slight smile, she took the microphone and began her speech. I was asked to remove this tonight, she began, her voice calm but firm. A murmur rippled through the audience. Because some might find it uncomfortable. But I wear this flag to honor the men and women who sacrificed everything for our freedom. For our right to agree, disagree, and even be uncomfortable. The room fell silent, her words hanging heavy in the air. This isn't just fabric. It's a reminder of the price paid for every moment we stand here, safe and free. To remove it would be to forget their sacrifices. And that I simply cannot do. A hush followed, but it was broken by the sound of a chair scraping against the floor. A decorated veteran, his chest adorned with medals, rose to his feet, his eyes wet with emotion. He stood straight, his posture firm, and raised his hand in a salute. One by one, others joined him, veterans, their families, and then civilians, until the entire room was standing, faces solemn, eyes fixed on Carrie. A single tear slipped down her cheek, her voice shaking as she concluded. May we never forget those who fought for this flag, for this freedom. As she stepped down, the applause was thunderous. But the night wasn't over. What happened next would leave everyone speechless. As Carrie descended from the stage, her heart raced, the powerful moment still reverberating through her. But before she could even reach her seat, the veteran who had first stood to salute approached her. His posture was rigid, but his eyes were soft, shimmering with gratitude. He extended his hand, rough and weathered from years of service. Ma'am, you honored more than just a flag tonight. You honored us. Thank you. Carrie's eyes filled with emotion. Thank you for your service. For everything. The veteran turned, his gaze now fixed on Karoline, who stood nearby, silently watching the scene unfold. His eyes narrowed with recognition. You're the press secretary, right? Serving under Trump. Karoline nodded, her face calm but resolute. Yes, sir. He took a step closer, his voice lowering. I heard they asked you to take off the pin too. Karoline met his stare head-on. They did. But I won't apologize for loving my country. A slow smile spread across the veteran's face. Good. Because we didn't fight for a country that apologizes for its pride. We fought for a land that stands tall, even when others try to bring it down. His words hung heavy in the air, drawing the attention of those nearby. Conversations hushed as people turned to listen. Karoline realized they were at the heart of a moment far bigger than themselves. Without warning, the veteran stepped onto the small platform beside the stage. He didn't ask for permission, didn't wait for an introduction. With a commanding voice, hardened by years of leadership, he addressed the room. I served under that flag for 25 years, he began, his voice firm. I watched my brothers and sisters fall on foreign soil for what it represents. Freedom, courage, and unity. And tonight, I hear that some find it offensive. His eyes swept the room, the intensity of his gaze piercing. Since when did patriotism become controversial? A murmur spread through the audience, faces reflecting a mix of shame, pride, and contemplation. The veteran's voice softened, the fire in his eyes replaced by a deep sadness. I lost friends who died with that flag on their chests. I came home carrying that flag draped over coffins. And yet, tonight, in the nation's capital at a gala meant to honor veterans, we are asked to hide it? To avoid discomfort. He paused, his shoulders trembling under the weight of his words. If the sight of this flag makes anyone here uncomfortable, then maybe they need to remember the cost of their comfort. Silence followed, a heavy, deafening silence. Eyes watered, heads bowed, and hands instinctively moved to hearts. The reality of his words settled into every corner of the hall. The veteran's voice dropped to a whisper, but it carried through the room with unmistakable power. This isn't just about a pin. It's about who we are as a nation. It's about never forgetting those who gave their all so we could stand here tonight, free to disagree, free to be offended, and yes, free to honor this flag. Tears streamed down faces as the gravity of his words sank in. Even those who had remained seated during the anthem now stood, faces solemn, backs straight. Karoline's eyes were wet, her hand resting protectively over her flag pin. Carrie's shoulders shook as she fought to hold back tears. The veteran stepped down, his body frail but his spirit unbreakable. He walked toward Karoline and Carrie, his head held high. "Thank you," he whispered, his voice cracking, "for remembering us." But the night wasn't over. The ripple effect of that speech was just beginning, and the world outside that room was about to weigh in. As the evening wound down, the emotional weight of the veteran's speech lingered in the air. Guests approached Karoline and Carrie, offering words of support, their faces reflecting admiration and respect. But even as they received handshakes and embraces, they were keenly aware that the night had sparked a fire far beyond the walls of the gala. By the time Karoline and Carrie stepped out into the crisp Washington night, their phones were buzzing relentlessly. Social media was ablaze. Clips of Carrie's defiant speech, the veteran's emotional testimony, and the standing ovation were going viral. Hashtags like #FlagControversy, #Patriotism Under Fire, and #VeteransVoices were trending worldwide. But it wasn't just praise flooding the digital space. As they scrolled through the comments, the backlash became evident. "How dare they politicize a veterans event?" one post read. "Just another stunt for attention," sneered another. "The flag isn't the issue. They're just trying to stir division." The critiques were harsh, polarizing the public into heated debates. News networks picked up the story, with pundits from all sides weighing in. Within hours, what had begun as a simple choice became a national conversation about patriotism, free speech, and respect. Karoline's phone buzzed with a call from the White House communications director. She hesitated for a moment before answering. "Karoline, the president saw the footage." The voice on the other end said, tension evident. "He's impressed, but not everyone is thrilled. Some are saying you turned a charity event into a political statement." Karoline's jaw tightened. "I didn't make it political. I made it patriotic." The director sighed. "I know, but perception is everything. Be ready for tomorrow's press briefing. They'll be coming for you." The call ended, leaving Karoline staring at her phone, the weight of what awaited her sinking in. Carrie, standing nearby, noticed Karoline's expression. "Tough call?" she asked softly. Karoline nodded. "They want to turn this into something it's not. They want to make it about politics." Carrie's eyes darkened. "We stood up for respect, for the flag, for the people who served. If they want to twist that, let them. We did what was right." Her words gave Karoline strength, but they both knew the fight wasn't over. By morning, headlines screamed from every news outlet. Flag controversy at Veterans Gala? Political stunt or patriotic stand? Carrie Underwood and White House press secretary refuse to remove flag pins. Backlash erupts. Divided nation. Is patriotism political? News anchors dissected every second of the evening. Analysts debated the implications, and opinion columns flooded the internet. But amid the chaos, something unexpected began to happen. Veterans across the country began to speak out. Social media filled with photos of service members, both past and present, proudly wearing the flag. Videos surfaced of veterans sharing their stories, their voices raw with emotion as they recounted the significance of the symbol. One particularly moving video featured an elderly woman, her frail hands clutching a folded flag. "This belonged to my husband," she said, her voice trembling. "They gave it to me the day they buried him. Don't you dare call this controversial." The narrative began to shift. The support grew louder than the criticism, and the backlash started to backfire. Those who had been quick to condemn Karoline and Carrie found themselves outnumbered by voices of patriotism and respect. But even as public opinion turned, Karoline knew she would have to face the media head-on. The press briefing loomed, and she would have to defend her actions, her principles, and her flag. Taking a deep breath, she steeled herself. "Ready to face the music?" Carrie asked, her hand resting reassuringly on Karoline's shoulder. Karoline met her gaze, her eyes unwavering. "I stood up for what's right, and I'd do it again. Let them ask their questions. I have my answers." Together, they walked away from the chaos of the gala, knowing that the true battle was just beginning. The press briefing room buzzed with anticipation. Journalists packed the space, their faces eager, hungry for a story that had captured the nation's attention. Cameras clicked, flashes went off, and the air was thick with the scent of controversy. Karoline Leavitt stood behind the podium, her posture straight, her face calm but resolute. The American flag pin gleamed proudly on her lapel, catching the light. It was a small gesture, but its significance was monumental. She knew that her every word, every expression, and every movement would be dissected by the press, pundits, and the public. Taking a deep breath, she began, "Good morning. Before we get to today's agenda, I'd like to address the events at last night's Veterans Gala." The room fell silent, pens poised, recorders running. "Yes, I was asked to remove my American flag pin," Karoline continued, her voice steady. "The reason given was to avoid making anyone uncomfortable, to avoid controversy." She paused, her eyes scanning the room, meeting the gaze of journalists who watched her intently. "But I didn't comply because this isn't about politics. It's about respect." The room erupted in questions. Reporters shouted over one another, their voices blending into a chaotic roar. Karoline raised her hand, her face firm. One at a time, a reporter from a major network stood up. "Ms. Leavitt, critics are saying you turned a non-political event into a statement. How do you respond to accusations of politicizing the flag?" Karoline's eyes narrowed, her voice sharp. "Respect for our veterans is not political. Honoring the symbol they fought for is not controversial. If the sight of the American flag makes people uncomfortable, then perhaps we need to examine why that is. But I will not apologize for showing respect to those who sacrificed for our freedom." Another reporter jumped in. "What do you say to those who argue that the flag has different meanings for different people, and that displaying it could be seen as divisive?" Karoline's face softened, but her conviction remained strong. This flag represents freedom, the freedom to agree or disagree, to honor or criticize, to stand or kneel. It represents the sacrifice of those who gave everything so that we could have those freedoms. It is not my place, nor anyone's, to erase that symbol out of fear of discomfort. That's not unity. That's censorship. Her words hung heavy in the room, the weight of her conviction echoing off the walls. Reporters scribbled furiously, some nodding, others watching her with narrowed eyes. But none could deny the power of her stance. A journalist from a political magazine spoke up. "Are you concerned about the backlash? About how this might affect your position within the administration?" Karoline's lips curled into a slight smile. "If standing up for respect costs me my job, then so be it. I would rather walk away with my integrity intact than compromise my principles for political convenience." The room fell silent once more, the gravity of her words settling in. This was no political stunt. This was a stand. Meanwhile, outside the White House, a crowd had gathered. Veterans, their families, and citizens from all walks of life stood in solidarity, waving American flags. Some wore pins identical to Karoline's. Others held signs that read, "Respect our veterans" and "Patriotism is not political." As Karoline finished the briefing and walked out of the room, her phone buzzed. It was a message from Carrie Underwood. "Saw the briefing. You were incredible. Proud to stand with you." Karoline smiled, her heart swelling with gratitude. She stepped out onto the front steps of the White House, the roar of the crowd meeting her ears. She looked out over the sea of faces, their pride and unity shining through. A veteran in the front row saluted her, his eyes wet with emotion. Karoline returned the salute, her chest tightening as the crowd erupted into applause. In that moment, she realized this wasn't just about a pin. It was about honoring the sacrifices of those who fought for freedom, about standing up for principles, and about reminding a nation of its identity. The narrative had shifted. What was meant to silence had only amplified the voice of patriotism. And as Caroline stood before the crowd, her flag pin gleaming in the sunlight, she knew that this was a moment no one would forget. Because respect isn't controversial, and pride in one's country isn't political. It's a legacy that continues to wave boldly, even when challenged.